Welcome to The Place You Can Say It, a podcast from the Religious Trauma Network. If you've ever carried questions you weren't allowed to ask, grief you were expected to hide, or wounds that were dismissed in the name of faith, you've found a place where your story matters. Welcome to The Place You Can Say It, honest conversations about religious trauma and healing beyond the hurt.
My name is Scot Loyd, and I'm thrilled tonight to be joined by Rebekah Drumsta and Janyne McConnaughey. And this is something new for the Religious Trauma Network. Really not something new. You guys have been doing a podcast, but it's new because I'm on board now and going to be talking to you guys a little bit about what you do and how that's important. And Rebekah, I think a good place to start perhaps for those that are getting acquainted with me is maybe you can tell the story from your perspective, how we connected, and then I'll talk a little bit about my work. And of course, Janyne, jump in here and we want to hear from you as well. But Rebekah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be involved with you guys. We met at Harvard, and I was impressed right off the bat with what you guys are doing. Such important work, but thank you for this opportunity.
You got it. I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you said, we met at Harvard not that long ago, actually. And so I remember you spoke alongside of one of our advisors, Dr. Paulette Bethel. You guys were on the same panel, and your presentation resonated with us both, and it just kind of clicked, and I could tell, I think we were on some of the same wavelengths here. And so it was April of 2026 that we met there at the Religious Trauma Symposium at Harvard Divinity School. And yeah, that was kind of an overwhelming experience, and it was hard to meet everybody that was there and listen to all the presentations. You couldn't do that. There's too many. But yeah, that's how we connected. And then I don't remember, somehow one of us emailed or texted the other one. I think actually I handed you Janyne's book.
Absolutely.
And it was just like, just so you
phenomenal.
know, I gave you her book, Trauma in the Pews.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, we swapped cards, something like that. Anyway, we just kind of chatted on the phone after that, and here we are today.
And Janyne, before I get into my story a little bit, I want to thank you for that book, Trauma in the Pews. It's one of the best, honestly, that I've read on the subject. So thank you for writing that and doing the work. Just the other day, I saw someone posting about it, and I was glad to chime in and say, absolutely, it's a great read. Janyne, thank you for the book. And why don't you take a moment and just kind of tell us about yourself and your work, and then I'll get into what I do, and then we'll hear from Rebekah, and we'll have a wonderful conversation this evening.
Oh, thank you for those words. Nothing does an author's heart anymore than to hear someone say that about their book. And it's hard to believe that has it been 4 years? 4 years since it published. And in the interim of that, my husband became very ill and underwent a liver transplant. And now we're in the throes of him having treatment because they found cancer in the transplanted liver. And so my life just kind of went upside down. And while I could do nothing, somehow that scrappy little book kept finding its way into people's offices, and so, you know, I'll be scrolling through Facebook and I'll see it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, oh, there it is. There's my book. Well, how did that get there? And recently that happened, and it gave me the opportunity to speak to a seminary group that were going through the book in their cohort. And so it's brought so many opportunities for me. And so my story, this is like the elevator speech of my story, because it's so complex that it's really hard. But basically, I was an educator. I was a teacher educator, and I have my PhD is in educational leadership with an emphasis in early childhood and mathematics. And so how I ended out writing Trauma in the Pews was because most of my career, I was a teacher educator in ministry preparation colleges. And so and I grew up in the church. My dad was the pastor, etc. When I had just turned 61, when I realized that I needed help, and I went and began therapy and realized and unlayered all of my childhood trauma. So I have 3 books before Trauma in the Pews, which tell my story of healing and healing childhood trauma and that. Um, so when I started out helping survivors, and then I realized that no matter how much I could help survivors, if ministry leaders didn't understand people who had experienced trauma and how that affected their spiritual life, then they were going to be re-traumatized. So that's how Trauma in the Pews came about. And I'm waiting today, my next book. It answers the questions that people said when they read Trauma in the Pews. They said, okay, so the problem's not spiritual. What do I do now? And that's what the next book answers. Is
Well, I
what you
can't
do
wait
now.
to read it. And I've got a ton of questions. And Luke, welcome. Glad that you're here. But I'm going to take a moment and introduce myself to you guys' audience. And thank you again for the opportunity to do this. I was so impressed with Rebekah and what you folks are doing at the Religious Trauma Network. And I said to myself after meeting Rebekah at Harvard, I said to myself, I've got to figure out a way to be involved with this group because they're doing such good work. And Janyne, when I read your book, I was like, yeah, I got to figure this out. So a little bit about myself. My name is Scot Loyd, and I grew up in rural Arkansas in a high control religious group, an offshoot of Pentecostalism, which took a lot of liberties with theology and most egregious in a lot of ways. They were the way that they treated women, the dress codes, the behavioral codes, all of that. It qualified as a cult because they rejected the Trinity. They were a oneness Pentecostal group. And as I got older, I started examining the doctrines and things of that nature. I was actually an evangelist for a while with that particular ministerial organization, and I would be in a different church every Sunday. So that was kind of the bulk of my youth in my 20s. In my 30s, I went back to the little community college in our neighborhood there and earned an associate's degree, kept on going, eventually got a master's degree in communication studies. I found a way to teach communication at some Christian colleges and coach competitive speech and debate. Returned and got my PhD in heritage studies, which is how we receive and interpret and present history to the world. And so a lot of my studies and a lot of my scholarship centers around the intersection of race, religion, culture, and communication. So those are the 4 lanes that I sort of focus in on, and then I talk a lot and I write about spiritual trauma, things of that nature as well. So that's sort of how the connection was made with Rebekah. So Rebekah, why don't you take a moment and tell folks about what you do, and then we'll take a turn with Luke as well, and we'll have a wonderful conversation. I got tons of questions for you guys, I promise.
Awesome. Yes, so I grew up independent fundamental Baptist in the Houston, Texas area. And from there, I was also homeschooled and part of Bill Gothard's IBLP/ATI program. And as I began understanding cults and cult dynamics, high demand groups, all of these words, I began to realize that there is a connection. They all connect. You have the Way Down workshop with Gwen Shamblin was part of that. Growing Kids God's Way. All of these other ministries, organizations. And so I often say 4 religious cults impacted the foundation of my life, but the truth is it was more like dozens. because all these little micro cults, family cults, individual churches that have accepted the high control, high demand dynamic as their foundation, they all like each other. And so they end up sharing resources, sharing speakers, sharing, guests, musicians, etc., and so forth. And so my first memory of religion is when my father's best friend was murdered in an atonement killing. He'd left a Mormon sect down in Mexico, and he'd taken all of his children with him. He had 6 kids and his wife. And they said, either you give us the kids or you give us your life. And he tried running, and he ended up was my father's closest friend, and he was murdered. And I remember being 5 years old and thinking, so if you believe something differently about God, somebody might kill you. And so that's where my spiritual formation kind of started, like asking questions and noticing things as a 5-year-old. Then I grew up in the Independent Baptist Church, Bill Gothard influence, etc., and so forth, leading me into having my child laying in a hospital bed thinking God had abandoned me. It was a very traumatic, difficult birth story. I felt them cut me open during a C-section after a very long labor. And I felt I'd been abandoned by God. I'd done everything right. I exercised. I ate the right foods. I prayed prayers every night. We played hymns to my belly. We did all these things, and God suddenly was nowhere. And I could have died. My child's life was not at risk, but slightly at risk. And so that's where my deconstruction began. When I looked at this beautiful little baby girl laying next to me and said, there's no way I'm going to tell her that she's disgusting and desperately wicked and a vile creature. And I didn't even understand it. I just knew I couldn't tell her that she was evil, this innocent little baby. And so that's where the deconstruction started for me. And that was right at 18 years ago. But my questions had begun to formulate back then as a 5-year-old, saying, so if you believe something different about God, somebody might kill you? And that led me into a few years of isolation, confusion, a lot of trauma that I didn't understand yet was trauma. You'd go and somebody would say, oh, you're having questions about your faith. Well, read this book, say this prayer, memorize these Bible passages. And that is what was the tools, because I only knew about Christian counselors. And I would go to one person and something would hit a dead end, like they're wrong. I need more help. This isn't enough. There's more answers out there. And that ended up leading me into a better understanding of therapy language, cult dynamics, all of those things as I self-educated myself. And then I started finding that there was a lot of other young mommies like me who needed help, who had these same types of questions, who didn't know where to go. You can't ask your pastor, you can't ask your mom, you can't ask all these people, because then they look at you as like rebellious, or you're questioning God's authority. How could you do this? And so I started writing anonymously, and because I wasn't brave enough, I didn't have the courage. And I still remember the day when I changed my website address over to RebekahDrumsta.com. That was a line in the sand for me. That was, this is the truth, my truth. These are the things I am saying. I lived this harm, so I can speak about it. Because it is what I lived, my experience. And before I knew it, there were people contacting me asking for help. So I went back and I got 2 different professional life coaching certifications. I re-educated myself again as a young mom, as the best I knew to do. And I started coaching people. I started writing more. And then the next thing, researchers started finding me. So I would work with researchers, whether it was on religious fundamentalism, Bill Gothard, the homeschool movement. And that's just kind of all led us to where we are today with Religious Trauma Network. And so my work is with individuals. I do consulting with authors, with parents who are concerned, their families, like their children have joined a community that they don't feel is healthy. So sometimes parents will contact me. I'll have children contacting me about their families and their stories, professionals who want to know more, therapists, all sorts of different people will come to me. So I'll do consulting, private coaching. I still work with researchers, still do a lot of writing and advocacy, and anything that comes my way, I really consider it. Of course, I have my own book that I've published. I have another one that I finished, and I'm looking for a publisher. And again, that's where we find us today. That's kind of my story in a nutshell. But it's been a journey that at first was quite lonely. There was no one else out there saying these words. I often say, like, I used hashtag deconstruction, hashtag spiritual abuse, hashtag religious trauma, and there'd be like 150.
Yeah.
And now there's thousands and thousands of people using these hashtags. And so my loneliness, honestly, my loneliness in this world began to disappear when I met Luke and Janyne and David. And I found my people that I could say what I needed to say, and they didn't go, what do you mean by that? I could say the things that didn't make sense, but it would make sense to them. And so we are Religious Trauma Network because we're coming together with one voice, helping people share their stories, showing people a little different way of building a community. But first and foremost, we're friends. And so...
Absolutely.
And thank you for Luke and Janyne and David. And now Scott.
Yeah, and Rebekah, you said something so important, and I think all of us that are deconstructing, coming out of high control religious groups or wherever we may find ourselves, right, on that spectrum, and I've talked to folks where, they had seriously traumatic situations and circumstances that they faced, much like the trauma that you described. And then there's folks like me who grew up, it was a cult by definition, but because I'm a male, a white male, I got a pass on a lot of the trauma that was unfairly inflicted on women and things that they had to suffer. But coming out of that, you describe a need for community, and that's what I'm so excited about when we talk about the Religious Trauma Network and the relaunch of this podcast, the place you can say it, right? Because there's so many people out there that I think have had similar experiences like all of us, but they don't know where their community, where their people are, where they can feel safe to express what they've experienced. So thank you so much. Luke, thank you for joining us, and why don't you take a moment and sort of tell us about yourself and about your journey and about your connection with the Religious Trauma Network. It's a pleasure to meet you, by the way.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Scott. Thank you. Scott with one T. That's how you sit in my brain. It's Scott with one T.
Yeah, one T
I have
and
other
one
Scott.
L. Yeah,
Yes, one L too. Yeah.
My family couldn't afford the extra consonants.
Okay.
There you go.
See, now I really won't forget. So thank you for that. I'm 51, just handful of days ago, so that's how old I am. Born in 75. Preacher's kid my whole life. Mom and dad are both still alive, so still a preacher's kid. Non-denominational, charismatic, evangelical. There was some fundamentalism, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that my family were fundamentalists. We were pretty laid back. There was much about my upbringing that matches the religious kind of upbringing that folks, for example, like Rebekah, who call it a cult. Like there's a lot about my experience that matches things that are being called cults. I wouldn't say that mine was a cult. We were free to leave. If we left, we weren't ostracized. Questions were allowed. Answers were generally always directed back to the same, formulaic answers according to the faith or whatever. But so it wasn't a trap, and it wasn't that kind of a thing. There was love, but there was also abuse. I was physically traumatized at a very young age, pre-language, and that was seen and misunderstood by the adults around me as more of a demonic thing. And so spirits were there was praying, laying on of hands, circle of prayer, this kind of thing. That's how that was dealt with. Some behavioral stuff had presented in me. And anyway, long story short, they missed some real actual trauma, not even religious trauma, like physical, not that religious, I'm talking like bodily trauma, sure. Sexual trauma, if I can say that. So I regret saying actual. I think you all know what I mean. Sure. Self-correction has been noted. Absolutely. Take it or leave it, y'all. So anyway, that got missed. And so really I lived, the first 25 years of my life in a dance between not being beaten, which is to say not behaving inappropriately or sinfully, which, for a preacher's kid, that line can be a little tighter than for some kids. You're kind of living in a fishbowl. I went to Christian school from kindergarten through 12th grade and, a Christian college, and I was sheltered, but I was also happy to be there for pretty much a lot of it. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what it was like to not be that way. I didn't know that the people in the world actually didn't want to kill me or hurt me. There was a lot I didn't know. So inside of the bubble, I was figuring it out, and I was rising in my own way to the top of my own little possibility. And so fast forward, 25 to 35, I'm starting to not buy it, a lot of it anymore. For probably a lot of different reasons, but I would say mostly good questions, and there were just no easy answers. I just kept finding that reality, as I was running into it, was more complicated than easy answers, and everything I was coming from everything was just so easy, and it just didn't line up with the reality that I was bumping into. And so I was starting to do my own little wandering, and around the age 34, 35, I was living out of the country. I was living in Haiti, and we had moved there in June of 2009. We were going to start what I was calling a film school. I wanted to teach storytelling skills, not specifically the skills of storytelling, but I wanted to connect the people's innate ability to tell stories, because they're incredible storytellers, connect those to some modern tools so they can be telling their own stories. Most of the time, I was noticing that when people are telling a story about Haiti, they look like me, and they don't look like a Haitian, and they're not, so I wanted to help bring those skills down. There were some other people doing that at the time. We were there when this really big earthquake hit in 2010, January 12th. And so the 4 weeks resulting from that, I threw myself into trying to make a difference, and I got PTSD. And so for about 3.5 years, after that 4-week period, I don't have a problem. Everyone else has a problem. Finally, I had a moment where I had basically a psychological break. I was ripping my clothes off. I kind of lost it. To be lighthearted about it, the cheese had slipped off my cracker that night. I was having a moment. And after that, I was sort of like, okay, maybe I do have some problems. Maybe, okay. So I opted to go get help. I also had this production company because now I'm back in the States, and I was like, well, while I'm getting help, I'll make a movie about that. So what I thought would take a year took 6 years in terms of making a film, because I'm also actually trying to heal from PTSD, but that unlocked early childhood trauma, and that unlocked more, and so the sweater began to unravel. Eventually, I was researching religious trauma as something that happened to other people, but not me. And these two were in an online presentation that I had signed up for. I just saw them. There were a number of other people. I reached out to 3 of the people who were in the seminar. These two are 2 of them, and the other is another friend that I also now have. I basically was like, I want to know these people. And it was through some of what they were already presenting themselves and the work of others that I realized, while I have come here to learn about something that has nothing to do with me, I think, yeah, shit, now I guess I have religious trauma too, because this is totally what I'm going, And I started going, am I an ambulance chaser? Do I have all the traumas? But truthfully, I would say that the day-to-day struggles that I have to this day, as a 51-year-old man, having healed from psychological trauma after a major like natural disaster, having healed from the a lot of what came with the physical trauma of the early childhood, the stuff that still screws with me to this day is the original sin not being worth anything. If you love something, it must be awful. To this day, when I love things, I say jokingly, but I never don't say, I love this. I'm definitely going to lose it. It just happened to a truck of mine. I got a used truck. I really liked this truck, you guys. And I actually said to my friend, I think I love this truck. And then there was a beat, and I said, that means I'm going to lose it. Well, sure enough, it turns out the whole frame is gone. I can't have my truck anymore. So, but that's that confirmation bias where like life just, these things happen, but those are the things that stick. And all the times where I win just flies past me without me noticing it. So I reached out to them and actually, Rebekah first, we were friends for a while. As I recall, Rebekah, you had the idea to do RTN earlier than we started, and I might have been the person to say like, I need a minute. I wanted to go slower because I just wanted to have you as a friend for longer before we started to do a thing. If you remember that differently, certainly let me know.
We wanted to work together on something.
Yeah. So I was invited, and I'm grateful to be here. This is Rebekah's, as far as I know, this is Rebekah's brainchild with Janyne working, like they kind of seeded this together, but I feel lucky to be here. Of the four of us, I'm the one who doesn't still believe in God necessarily that I'm aware of. I think the rest of us do. I'm not an atheist. I'm just sort of like, I can't know, so I don't care. I'm just doing my best to love people. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, thank you, Luke, and I think that's a very honest position, right? I often say that however you want to label it, a form of agnosticism is very intellectually honest because you are saying, I don't know, we can't know, things of that nature. I do, and I think I had this conversation with Rebekah early on. There's some days that I wake up and I feel like an atheist. Other days I wake up and I feel like a red hot believer in Jesus and embrace all of that. And so there's probably a little agnosticism in all of us if we're being honest. And I choose to believe in Jesus, the Jesus that we see represented in the Gospels, and that's sort of where I'm at on my journey. But you said something really important, Luke, and I think it's important for everyone to understand, all of our listeners, that there's no clear line, there's no clear journey from point A to point B in all of this. I have a friend that often says, deconstruction is going to take you at least a decade, and for some of us, it takes a lot longer, right? It's a lifetime journey. And Janyne, I want to come back to you because when I read your book, and then almost immediately, right? It may be even on the cover, but it's at least in the introduction and all of that. Your connection to celebration of the disciplines, Foster's classic work. I thought for a long time that I was the only person that had read that book, and then I discovered you have read it as well, and truthfully, there's a lot of folks that have benefited from that. But I want to know, how did you make that connection? What was that process like, and why did you choose that particular book to sort of frame your writing about spiritual trauma?
You're muted. There you go.
That's a pause. I realized I was muted. Okay, so wow, that is a really complicated. I was familiar with it. I had been familiar with it. I grew up in a Wesleyan denomination, but I was not. It was not something that I realized as I returned to it and read it, that it had been very embedded in my spiritual formation, more so than because I was not raised in fundamentalism. I ended up there in my mid-20s, and so I contacted a friend of mine who had started a publishing company, Barry Pell Press, that published Trauma in the Pews. But I was working on a completely different book, and as I said in my intro, I realized that I actually did. This is I'm having a hard time remembering. Oh my gosh, this is so complicated. So the conference that Luke is talking about, I actually did a presentation on how people are re-traumatized. So I asked my publisher, we were working on a different book, and I said, would you mind listening to this and just tell me if I'm on the right track? And she listened to it, and my book coach, they were kind and listened to it, and then they sat there stunned. I thought, oh my gosh, it was bad. They didn't say anything, and they said, that's a book, Janyne. That is a book. And I said, oh, then I did do this. Okay, so that is really where Trauma in the Pews began, with that. So her mentor was Roy Carlyle, who was the publisher or editor who worked with Richard Foster on Celebration of Disciplines. And so she contacted him and said, oh, I've got an author that I think she has a book. And so then he came and he said, oh yes, this is a book. And I think that you should use Richard Foster's Celebration of Discipline. I don't know that I've ever said this on a podcast. It was such a great question, Scott. So he said, I think you should use his book as kind of as a framework for it. And it was getting ready to have its, I don't know, 25th celebration or something. And so he was, he was excited about that. And so that's where that came from. And I it was a journey for me to go through there and remember the book from early. I don't know whether I'd been introduced to it in college. I have no real recollection, but to go through that again and see it through a trauma-informed lens. And sometimes I agree, you read the book, sometimes I agree with him and sometimes I disagree.
Right, and that's one of the things I really liked about it, that you did that.
Right? I just don't know. That's just who I am. Everybody in the room knows that. I'm going to say exactly what I think, right? I'm not intimidated by hardly anything. And so it was a journey for me to go through it. The odd thing was when I finished the book and I published the book, actually I named it after a really bad experience that happened to me. And that they said, what do you think about when you feel this book? And I said, Trauma in the Pews. And that's how the title came. And then I realized that I had re-traumatized myself by giving my own book a title that triggered me constantly. And I had to go off in my corner and work through that. So anyway, but I did not write it about religious trauma. In fact, I didn't even mention cults or anything in it. And when people started hearing what the book was about, they said, oh, so you're going to talk about religious trauma. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's what we call it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, and so I went back and I added some sections in there because I thought, I can't publish this book without addressing that for these people who have experienced religious trauma. But at that point, I had not fully accepted my own. And so after I published the book, I spent another 2 years working through my religious trauma. And that's what the next book draws from, is what I learned in that process. So it was surprising for me to come, because I came out of Wesleyanism and fundamentalism, and then ended out using Celebration of Discipline, which was a wonderful journey for me to see it through the lens that I needed to see it through.
And I think that's so important. And Janyne, you illustrate something, as did Luke, with this whole idea is that sometimes we don't get the language right. Sometimes we're trying to grasp at vocabulary to describe what we have experienced and what we've been through. And I think there's a lot of folks out there like us, that have similar journeys. We may not have the words for it. We may not have the vocabulary or the capacity to describe exactly what we've been through, but trauma is something that your body remembers, your mind remembers, and if you've experienced it, you know exactly what we're talking about. And Rebekah, I want to return to you right now because I haven't had an opportunity to read your book, but talk a little bit about your book. And I know you've been working on a new one that is coming soon. To all the publishers out there, you need to publish this book because it's really important work. So Rebekah, tell us about your first book and tell us a little bit about what you're writing and working on now.
Sure. Yeah, so my first book is called When Family Hurts, 30 Days to Finding Healing and Clarity. And I wrote a book that I needed. That's just the bottom line for this one. Sometimes when you're in the middle of a family situation, you don't have, it can take you a month to get in to see a therapist. They're often booked out, or you don't actually know what you are feeling or needing yet, but you know you're in the middle of a situation that you need to find some answers. And that's where I was at, and I didn't have any resources. I couldn't find anything to help me. And so When Family Hurts, because we're in a former churchy world environment here. It's like a devotional style, but it's not a devotional. It is not. It's written it's a neutral book. It's not religious or unreligious. But it is day by day. You read a little snippet from me. There's an action item for you to do, some spots to take notes for yourself. And at the end of it, I really do hope and believe that it's a very simple process. It's a very simple book, but it helps you think through, what do I need? What do I want? What am I feeling? Where do we need to go from here? What do I need to do or not do? And so I just really feel like it helps people answer some of those questions that they have right now when you don't know what else to do. You don't know who to go to, or you're waiting to see a therapist. You're waiting to, find those answers. And so that way it can just be somebody who doesn't have judgment, doesn't have a bias. It's just you and a book and your own thoughts and your own feelings, being able to put it all into one place. So it doesn't cover religious trauma. It doesn't cover any of that, but it was just that book that needed to be in the world because I needed it at one point. So that's
Beautiful.
why I made sure it got into the world. This next book that, yes, I am looking for representation, a publisher, an agent for the book. But it comes more down to, yes, religious trauma, and about systems and leaders and people inside of these religious systems that we have, and how the way systems are formed, the theologies that we hold. The buzzword today is trauma. And so it's how trauma actually informs all of these things, but we haven't seen it yet. And so it helps people understand how unhealed trauma, whether it's from people from the past, our ancestors, theologians, our grandparents, ourselves, how that unhealed trauma actually informs our religious systems and our theologies. And it just helps people take a look and understand how and why that happens. And then how do we go forward with the very first thing we must do, though, is heal ourselves. Stop long enough to heal your own wounds first. And so my book, the working title is inspired by Janyne's, but and with permission, but during a conversation we had one day. But at the end of the book, my goal is to help you be able to create healthier systems that are not rooted in unhealed wounds or big questions that we couldn't find answers for. So we keep digging and digging and digging and creating theologies, and whether it's John Calvin or all these people that say, oh, what a wretch I am. I must be pre-selected by God. That's the only way that I must, that God must love me. And so wait a second, honey, research his life. See what he actually lived through, what his childhood was like, and you begin to see those things. And so that's the book, is understanding how trauma has impacted our religious systems and our theology today, in the past, and where we go from here, and creating healthier systems that are created from healing, not from trauma.
Well, I'm so excited to read both the books, and you mentioned this word systems, and I remember when I was a pastor, and all of us young pastors, we sort of got enamored, right, with the whole church growth movement, and
Yeah.
one of the big buzzwords was systems, and all it was basically was a lot of business guys finding a way to impose sort of a franchising of church into the church world. In fact, there's a great book. I forget the author's name, but the title of the book is McChurch, and the authors compare how church systems, especially in the church growth movement, the mega church movement, has sort of reduced what they do to a formula that can be replicated and repeated over and over again. That's why when you walk into a lot of these churches, the feel is the same, the songs are the same, the formula is the same. And, as I begin to study, there is in this country, from its outset, I think we all understand that in a large degree, I say this often, that the system, however you want to define that, whether economically, in the justice system, the educational system, whatever metric you want to measure, I always say that this country was built by people who look like me. I'm a white male, for the benefit of people who look like me. And I think there's a lot of systems, right, that operate that way in the church as well. That it's about benefiting a certain person. A lot of times it's the pastor or his family, at the expense of those who are actually doing the following and building the organization. So I think it's so important that not only do we address these individual traumas that all of us have faced, and that's one of the reasons for this podcast. This is the place you can say it. We hope to invite folks to share their story in a safe place where they can tell what happened to them. But those are individual stories that resonate with people because there is a systemic issue. There is a system that is in place that keeps replicating these kinds of experiences. You would think by all of us speaking up and speaking out that it would go away, but no, it keeps replicating itself because it's benefiting a select few at the expense of many, many others. Does that make sense?
It does, and that's one of the reasons I wrote my book, and it's because I see that what you just explained, in my perspective, it's part of the problem. And it's two parts again. Number one, it's unhealed people. And Janyne and I've talked about this so many times. It's unhealed people who are taking leadership positions, and then it's their triggers, their traumas, their reactions, their family patterns. That is what is informing decisions. That's what is creating our unhealthy systems. And so when we stop long enough, and pastors, and I'm sorry to say this, but pastors are some of the ones who do not want to hear the word trauma the most. They push against it. And so while my book, Janyne's book, we want leaders to read it, the reality is, and as Janyne has found, and she could obviously speak better to this than I, but they won't read it. And so the struggle is at home during these conversations, as I'm sitting here in my basement in Wyoming, we heal ourselves. We start in the pews if we have to, and we heal ourselves. And as I deal with clients, it's so easy to see the pastor who hurt me, the Sunday school teacher who took advantage of me. So we put a face, we have the name because they are the individuals who did the harm to us. But I see so often that when people can zoom out and realize that pastor, that Sunday school teacher, that your mom and your dad, they bought into a system that was set up to control this person or that person, to shut down this race or that race. To when you begin to dissect those systems, you begin to see the truth for what it is. And yes, an individual did abuse you, cause you harm. I'm not saying that did not happen. But sometimes we have to understand that it is a bigger picture, that they bought into the system. They bought into the lie. And that was what was attractive for them. As I look back at my family, the other kids I grew up with and their stories, what attracted them to Bill Gothard and his way of, making sure that your kids don't have basic youth conflicts, that they don't have these same problems that you had. I can teach you a way that they won't have these problems. So they were running from their pain. They were running from their traumas. They were running from their abuses, looking for answers. And this is what felt right to them. It felt good. They were used to it. It was familiar. It was hope. And that's what landed them in a system that then they absorbed and became part of that system. And it does not negate a personal accountability. Like if you abuse someone, if you harm someone, that is your personal responsibility. But again, there is a full system that surrounds everyone that we have to pay attention to. So yes, I agree with you 100% plus.
Absolutely.
That, yeah.
And Janyne, I want you to comment on this, because I think, when we see these instances of abuse, whenever they come up, a lot of times ministerial leaders, pastors, organizational leaders, they'll get up and they'll pay lip service to what an individual has experienced. And a lot of times that's sort of the cop out for organizations and denominations. They say, well, you had a bad experience, or that was a bad church, or that was a bad pastor. And you're exactly right, Rebekah. Individual people experience bad things at the hands of individual churches, but we've got to speak to the system as well that keeps reproducing this over and over again. Janyne, your thoughts?
Well, I think it's interesting. Once I started unfolding my own, especially my young adult religious trauma, and I began to, which sometimes I fall into conversations with people where I learn maybe more than I wanted to learn. Maybe I needed to learn that, but for whatever reason, I began to see how the system in the church has protected abusers, and that there is, if you try to stay informed at all, there's another pastor that has morally failed that comes through your feed just about every single day. There's another one. Yep. And that does not happen because bad people go into ministry.
Right.
Okay. That does not happen because it happens because it's a system where it's easy to hide it. Whether you walk in the door with that, whether it's a failing that you come to, whatever it is, the system that the church has built has protected and not addressed the survivors, not supported the survivors, and often maligned them. And so I teach at Tabor College in their neuroscience and trauma program. And one day after class, we were sitting on in the Zoom room. I hang out after class. Anybody who wants to stay will just hang out. And so it's a master's program, and so they were all professionals. And so that day, sometimes there's men in the class. Sometimes they stay. This day was just women, and they started asking me, and I said, the truth is that if I had ever told my story, if I had ever come forward and told my story as a young adult, I would not be sitting here as your professor right now. Because I would have gained a reputation. I would have, all the things would have happened. And that is because it's a system. The abusers, they've gone on and lived their life, right? But the system kept me silent. And that's what's happening right now, is that this has always been a problem because the system protects abusers, but we're beginning to talk about it. We're being brave and telling our stories. And so I don't know if that answered.
No, absolutely.
That.
Yeah. And I have a conjecture here too, if Scott's ready for that.
Yeah.
And Luke, you could probably speak to this one as well. But my conjecture is the church is been so concerned with the people they let in or get in. But they haven't been concerned with the people that are already in. And so it's about soul winning and getting people to come to church and getting people in. Or, oh no, that lifestyle we don't allow in our church. No, no, no. So it's either we don't let them in or hurry up and get them in. But then once the people are in the church, then it is not as big of a deal of the little girls or the teenage girls sitting in the pews and how this is. So they're not as concerned with the lives, the traumas, the real life of those people. It's been more about who we do let in or who we don't let in. But once you're in, and now we don't care as much about you anymore. And that's probably too generalized, but that's kind of what I've been noticing and seeing, that once you're in, okay, you're in, yay, you're safe, you're saved, or you're a project we're going to work on. Instead of actually the deep mental, emotional, even, yes, spiritual because you're in church, those deep parts of us somehow get missed over. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I see the place you can say it. I'm saying it because that was a conjecture that I've had in my head for a while.
Yeah, and that resonates. Luke, does that resonate with anything that you've experienced? Any thoughts you'd like to share with that?
I mean, I don't know that I'd say that it does in a way, like it's making an impression on Rebekah. She's like noticing a pattern of it. I don't know that it hits me or jumps off the page quite as much for me. I have wondered, through my deconstruction journey, it sort of became clear to me. I don't know that I ever really arrived at like making a statement about it or having an opinion about it, but it sort of became clear to me that when compared to, say, actually paying for crime that you may have committed against someone, getting forgiveness at your local church, and having all your sins washed away, which is technically, if we're really being honest, what God wants to do with you matters more, am I right, than what the legal system wants to do with you. Like, if I could get square with God and not have to do the jail time, I'm going to go get saved. And so I do think the foot of the cross, metaphorically speaking, is a place where a lot of broken, wounded, hurt people go. And not everybody who's broken and wounded and hurt is an abuser or becomes a traumatizer. So there are a lot of innocent people who were hurt at the foot of the cross. Unfortunately, as forgiveness seems to be very easy to get, literally you say a sentence and I guess mean it real bad. Being reborn looks nothing like being firstborn. There's no pain, there's no agony, there's no bleeding, there's no screaming, there's no wailing, there's no expense, there's no cost, there's no being raised afterwards. You can be born again into this new magic body and this new magic life, and it happens the minute you say the words and mean them real bad. Meanwhile, I look at deconstruction and people going through it and think that looks a lot more like labor to me. I think there are a lot of dangerous people who flock to easy solutions. And I think there are a lot of hurting and not dangerous people who flock to those same watering holes of hope. And so I think churches are, unfortunately, by their very nature of what they offer, kind of dangerous places that require real supervision. Like professional, attentive, attuned, almost like, if I can borrow a metaphor, a shepherd would be with a flock. You need somebody who actually gives a real rat's ass about the hearts and souls and lives of the people coming through the door, including the ones who mean to do harm. Like, there's places for those folks too. They need help too. Here with the tender wounded sheep is not where everybody gets fixed, unfortunately. We have to be, So I don't know that I necessarily see exactly what Rebekah is saying, but I have long seen And I currently, I've spent some years volunteering in a local prison with people. Some of them are doing life, and like there's a sense in there, like you hear them too, and there's a lot of ownership of a lot of this stuff. Is just that we all have to deal with our stuff. Because if we don't, it comes out, it bleeds out, and it affects the world. It doesn't mean I got my hand slapped pretty hard once when I used the hurt people line, because it is a true thing. Hurt people oftentimes will hurt people, but not everyone who was hurt becomes an abuser, right? Not everyone who was hurt becomes a re-traumatizer. I will say though that when we've been hurt, if we're withholding ourselves for protective reasons, it at the very least, because of the beauty that every human really has to offer the world, it's a damn shame that people feel like they can't be alive in their own skin in this world in this year. And religion has had, of all kinds, of all shapes, of all different gods, and it's had a very long time to pull us out of all this existential stuff, and yet we keep finding humanity is human, and we behave certain ways, and it's just like, I just wonder when we're going to get the clue. I just wonder when we're going to wake up, and if you look around, it feels like maybe not anytime soon. And so some of religious trauma that's happening right now is really interesting to me, because people are in a way becoming ejected from what may have been a familiar, comfortable, safe place prior to it traumatizing them, into the polycrisis. So you're being ejected from a miracle fix to all the universe's problems, and you're being spat upon the beach of climate crisis is real. LGBTQ issues are trash. Women don't have their rights anymore. We're using up all the resources on the earth. Like, capitalism is killing the planet. Like, what's good about deconstruction anyway? Like, it's a tough time to be alive, and I think right now, like, this is why I do the religious trauma thing. Like, why would you even do this if you don't believe in one particular God or that there is or whatever? It's because I believe that people are real, and people are having lives and having experiences, and there's so much needless suffering that's being had and then that's being reissued, and we can help with that, whether there's a long-term, a bigger story at play or not, And so for me, it's I reckon, like, I hate the program. Rebekah, you nailed it. Like, the people who I can say on paper abused me, they called it discipline. Mm-hmm. I call it beating the shit out of me. They called it spanking, right? The people who abused me did it because they were trying to save me from eternal conscious torment in hell. They were trying to love me while they were hurting me. And so, like, none of this is easy. Right? But I look at my parents and I go, they didn't invent that. They didn't write that script. Here's how we're going to do it. When I saw, I think it was on Shiny Happy People, the first season, when I saw a clip of the spanking demonstration on stage at one of these churches, and I realized, like, even down to then you hug them, but if the hug's not sincere, then you re-spank. I thought my dad made that shit up. And when I saw that, I was like, it was horrifying, but it was one more reason to go, okay, you know what? I could be mad because my dad's an idiot. And I love my dad, and if he heard me say it, he'd know what I'm doing here. I could be mad because dad's an idiot and he fell for a really stupid thing. But I can't be mad at dad for making that shit up. Dad did not come up with the idea that to beat me was holy. He really bought into it. And so, like, I can work with this. We're all people who are doing our best. Well, not all of us are doing our best, but we're all deserving of the chance to do our best. And so that's probably how I would pull an answer out of my butt on that one.
But look, you as you normally do in your storytelling way, you were able to say better what I was trying to say. With being able to the way you said, say a prayer and suddenly you're Christian, but then the people inside who's actually caring about their souls. That's how you described it was what I was trying to say. So
and you're writing a book about it, so I have no doubt.
Well, that's not in the book. It was just like out of
no
Rebekah's brain right now. But
very well.
And Luke, that was really powerful. And you said a lot of things that I'm sure resonates with a lot of folks. And just to confirm what Rebekah is thinking about and what she's writing about, what you described was not necessarily a church system, but a theological system, right? A lot of these systems, right? They even call it systematic theology. There are systems that are passed down from one generation to the next without questioning, without pushback, without scrutiny, and it perpetuates this harm. We've got just a few minutes left in this episode, but the good news is we're going to be doing this every month with different voices and different opportunities to speak to these issues. But before we finish up today, Janyne, I'll give you the opportunity to maybe speak to someone who's listening to this and something that we've said resonates with them. What would you say to that person that maybe is hearing a lot of this for the first time, but it resonates with their experience? What counsel would you give them?
I think that I would say it's scary. I think I would say that when you start realizing that what you believed doesn't make sense, that it isn't working. I give the illustration very early in my healing. I started talking about living the fruits of the Spirit by control, because I realized that I just white knuckled my faith, and the fruition of that is in this book. But it's like trying to hold a beach ball down underneath the water. And you're just holding it, trying to behave, trying to do all the things you're supposed to do. And that's what an exhausted faith is. That is, and you, I would say, which I hope the book will get out there and actually say this, that that was not what faith was meant to be. Right. And sometimes you have to go through all of the messiness that we've talked about today. And sometimes it's scary, and sometimes it's but to find your path to living out, if you choose to, which we demonstrate that we give everyone a choice. We're not trying to push anyone toward any particular faith, any way that they need to live their faith, anything, but that there is hope to heal. And to, but it's messy, and you have to be brave. And so, if for anyone who's listening, we have a support group every month, and people come and they share, and we keep it safe. And you need to build you need to find community of other people who are going through the same thing.
Well, and I would just add, Janyne, to what you just said, that, and you sort of did, but just to state it very emphatically, and there is community. Like, we are running a support group. We are far from the only people out there talking about all this stuff. And really, as opposed to really any moment in the past, like every day, it's a little bit, I don't want to say easier or better, but there's a little bit larger of a group that's got your back, so there is no such thing as coming at this like late in the game. If anything, there's a lot more resources. Janyne, your book is going to be so helpful. Rebekah, your upcoming book, your current book, I have copies of all y'all's books. Scott, I've read your book. These are great resources that didn't exist. And like, as everybody's starting to finally speak up, it's happening. So that's just that other thing, Janyne, you're so right. And it used to be a really common refrain from people deconstructing that I'm alone, I'm isolated. And that can still definitely happen, especially right after you've left like a real church. You're going to feel, if you just aren't going anywhere, that's going to feel very different. But there is community forming, and there has been for a while, and it's getting deeper and richer. And by richer, I just mean, there's a lot more good stuff out there for people. So I think it's an encouraging time to take that leap, to have that courage.
Absolutely. And this is a community where you can say it, thus the name of our podcast, the place that you can say it and say it safely and say it with healing in mind as we move forward. So I know if you're listening to this podcast and something is resonating with you and perhaps you have a story to share, if you go to the Religious Trauma Network website, there will be a form that you can fill out if you'd like to be a guest on our podcast and share your story. And we'll be doing this once a month, so look for the podcast on a regular basis. Hit that subscribe button. Share this information with someone that you think could benefit from the conversation that we're having, and let's keep it going. Luke, thanks so much for mentioning my book. It's entitled The God I Was Given, Looking for Faith After Losing My Religion. It's available in audio and digital and paperback on Amazon. And thank you all for this introductory podcast. This is just a glimpse of good things to come, and I'm so encouraged and so excited about what the future is looking like for the Religious Trauma Network. And thank you all for what you do. You're doing a great work, and thank you for listening to The Place You Can Say It, a podcast presented by the Religious Trauma Network. Until next time, I'm Scot Loyd. Have a great day.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Place You Can Say It. If today's conversation resonated with you, we hope you'll subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who could benefit from it. You never know how a single conversation might help someone feel seen, heard, and a little less alone. The Place You Can Say It, honest conversations about religious trauma and healing beyond the hurt, is a production of the Religious Trauma Network. To learn more about our work, explore resources, or become part of the conversation, visit us at religioustraumanetwork.com. Until next time, may you continue to find the courage to tell your story, the freedom to ask honest questions, and the hope that healing is possible. We'll see you next time on The Place You Can Say It.